Good evening. My name is Bill Barnett. I'm an economist here at Loyola. I would like to welcome all of you all in the name of the Loyola University Economics Club, who is the sponsor of this event. The purpose of this, the reason that we're here tonight, is that one of my colleagues, Walter Block, was the target of a vicious attack based on secondhand information, and Walter is here to reply to his critics tonight. He did not have any other forum, so he decided to put this on to reply to his critics. Just a little bit about Walter. Walter has a PhD in economics from Columbia University. He has published well over 10 books. He has over 300 articles in refereed journals and in law reviews combined, although some of those have been accepted for publication and, just forthcoming, which is common. They just recently accepted and haven't quite made it into print yet. A word about our relationship. I've known Walter for about 8 years. During those 8 years, he's been an absolutely wonderful colleague. We have become close personal friends, and I know personally that Walter is a man of the absolute highest intellectual integrity. So, and then one other thing, the format, Walter's going to get up, make his presentation. When he's through, we have mics at the front for people to ask questions. One thing I would ask you, in the spirit of a preferential option for the critics, to let the critics come forth and get to the mics first before supporters of Walter. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that kind introduction. What I'm going to be doing tonight is making a few introductory remarks, after which I'm going to give the same speech that I gave at Baltimore at our sister university, Loyola College in Maryland. Won't be the exact same speech because I don't read speeches, I sort of speak from notes, but I have the same notes, so it'll be roughly the same. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to elaborate on my very, very brief remarks that I made, not in my formal speech, but in the question period on racism and why do we have a black-white wage differential. After that, I will talk a little bit about the brouhaha that's been created around this speech. Let me start off by reading a little bit from John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. I don't usually do this. I only do it when there's a hostile audience, and I'm afraid that Loyola is a hostile place nowadays for me. It didn't used to be that way until the Diversity Task Report, but now it sort of seems hostile. So this is my way of disarming hypercritics or critics that won't listen. Well, let's listen to what John Stuart Mill had to say. This is from his book On Liberty. If all of mankind minus one were of one opinion, and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. Were an opinion a personal possession of no value except to the owner, if to be obstructed in the enjoyment of it were simply a private injury, it would make some difference whether the injury was inflicted only on a few persons or on many. But the peculiar evil of silencing the expression of an opinion is that it is robbing the human race, posterity as well as the existing generation, those who dissent from the opinion still more than those who hold it. If the opinion is right, they are deprived of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. If wrong, they lose what is almost a great benefit, the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth produced by its collision with error. He continues, the greatest orator, save one, of antiquity, has left it on record that he always studied his adversary's case with as great, if not with still greater intensity than even his own. What Cicero practiced as the means of forensic success requires to be imitated by all who study any subject in order to arrive at the truth. He who knows only his own side of the case And now I'm reading more slowly because I think this is the crucial point. He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may have been able to refute them, but if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either opinion. The rational position for him would be suspension of judgment, and unless he contents himself with that, he is either led by authority or adopts, like the generality of the world, the side to which he feels the most inclination. Nor is it enough that he should hear the arguments of adversaries from his own teachers, presented as they state them and accompanied by what they offer as refutations. That is not the way to do justice to the arguments or bring them into real contact with his own mind. He must be able to hear them from the persons who actually believe them, who defend them in earnest and do their very utmost for them. He must know them in their most plausible and persuasive form. I'm not a lawyer, but I understand that before a lawyer goes on, what he does is he gets his law partners to be the other guy. And he doesn't tell his law partner to go soft on him, go easy on him. He says, kick my butt as best you can because I need the good preparation. Well, so it is in academia, I think. You students are cheated if you only hear one side of the issue. You're also cheated even if you hear both sides, but from the side of the person who disagrees, who doesn't do as good a job. Happily, at Loyola, we do have people who favor free enterprise. There aren't that many of us, but there are a few. So that you lucky people can hear a free enterprise argument from somebody, such as myself, who really believes in this stuff. Not just from some critic of the marketplace who is trying to be fair and give the other view. Suppose that you were a basketball coach and you use the words pick and roll, dunk, and defense. And then you were told that there are certain groups that don't like the use of that word, like jump shot. They're the anti-jump people. And if you mention the word jump shot, they go berserk and they accuse you of anti-jump shotting, or whatever that would be. Or suppose that there are a bunch of doctors who couldn't mention the words stethoscope, penicillin, or MRI, because if you mention those words, you would insult people. Well, how good would our medical establishment be if they couldn't even use these words, let alone utilize these techniques? Imagine firemen who couldn't use the word or use the thing fire hose, water, pressure. Well, we get into some sort of similar situation with economics when you can't use the word IQ or productivity differentiation or inferior or superior, because when you do, you're accused of being a racist or a sexist. Look, there are economic problems that only economists, well, I won't say that only economists can solve, but that economists have a contribution to make. And if we're handcuffed, if we have to put our hands behind our back and we can't use certain concepts for fear of being very harshly criticized, well then to that extent economics is less able to do what it could otherwise do. I did my dissertation at Columbia University and I got my PhD in 1972. My dissertation was on rent control. And I started giving speeches on rent control. And I was ready. I was ready to kick butt. I was ready for any objection to my thesis, but instead, you know what the objections were? Or what the questions were, or what the criticisms were? Am I a landlord? Do I know any landlords? Am I in the pay of landlords? Namely, it was all ad hominems. They didn't have any arguments to use against my views on rent control, namely that it screws up housing. But instead they resorted to this sort of a thing. Well, things haven't changed in many years. Now if you start talking about a male-female wage gap or a black-white wage gap, you're accused of being a racist or a sexist. It's equally ad hominem-ish and equally unjustified. Okay, now I'm going to start in on my speech with those preparatory remarks. I'm now going to try to emulate what I did in Baltimore. Tom DiLorenzo, my very good friend and a professor of economics there, invited me to talk about social justice. And I started off with social justice. And I have here this sweatshirt. And it says Social Justice University, Loyola University, New Orleans. Now, how are we supposed to take this? Well, there are two ways to take this. One, Loyola University stands for social justice, and what social justice means is what it usually means in the view of most people, namely egalitarianism, the view that there shouldn't be any rich or any poor, The view that people are rich out of exploiting the poor, and the only way to get rich is to exploit the poor. The view that absent any discrimination or anything untoward, all groups would be equal. We'd have the same proportion as doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, basketball players, plumbers, whatever. And if we don't, it's due to racism, sexism, capitalism, or some other ism like that. That's roughly what social justice means. But to say that Loyola University is a social justice university, I think implies that all the professors here and all the students buy into this doctrine. Well, I don't buy into that doctrine. I think that we ought to have not only diversity of race and sex and ethnic group and sexual preference and all that, but also diversity of ideas. Well, how can we have diversity of ideas if we're a social justice university, which means we have to buy into social justice? So I rejected that notion of social justice in Baltimore. I'm now giving the Baltimore speech. And what I said was, there's another way to define social justice, and that is justice on social issues, like discrimination, affirmative action, things like that. What is the view of justice on that? And if we define it that way, well then the entire Loyola community can be interested in social justice, and who wouldn't be interested in justice from whichever point of view you have on these issues? And that's the way I look at it. Of course, I'm really fooling myself because that's not what it means, but what the heck, you know, it's fun, I have to fool myself. Okay, so what I took in Baltimore as my lead-off point, or whatever you want to call it, my instance of social justice was the male-female wage gap. And the male-female wage gap, in the view of most people, is due to sexism. The idea is that most employers are men, and therefore they would have this natural animosity toward women. I tell you, most of the men I know, they don't have an animosity toward women. It's pretty much the opposite. But according to this theory, you know, we have an animosity toward women, we white males, or males in this case. And what I want to do is show you a cartoon or two that I showed there. The first cartoon is this one. Boy, it's not really as clear as it could be, but is that the best we can do, Clinton? Okay, well, I've got other diagrams that are more intricate than that one, and I'm hoping that I can get a better focus. Okay, so that's one explanation of the male-female income gap. Here's another one. This one I didn't show, but it's, and this one says, I feel like a man trapped in a woman's salary. It's another way of saying the same thing. And here's yet another one, also one that I did not show in Baltimore. And this says there's a state lottery, and this week's... I guess I don't have to explain it. If you have to explain the joke, you're in trouble, you know, so you people are getting the joke, so that's good. The idea here is that the reason females earn less than males, and the illustration I'll be using is 70%, namely a wage gap of 30. It's a little less now, it's more like 25. It keeps changing, but I'm not interested in the slight changes up and down. I'm interested in the fact that there's a significant gap between what males and females earn. And the usual explanation is due to greed or capitalism or male employers or something like that. Women are victims of a wage gap. It's due to patriarchy, sexism, whatever. If we were to put this in terms of supply and demand, it would look like this. Here we have wages and quantity of labor, and the demand curve over here is the demand curve assuming no discrimination. And that's what the wage would be. And there is no discrimination against males, so the wage of males is what it would be with no discrimination. But employers, because they're horrible people, shift their demand curve to the left for women workers, female workers, and thus the demand for female workers is less than it otherwise would be, and that explains why we have the lower wage. Let me give you a few quotes to support this sort of a thing. Women with a university degree earn just $1,600 more a year than men with high school education. Working women who graduated from university earn just $4,000 more annually than men with less than grade 9 schooling. Here's a quote from some famous economist. Quote, jobs held by women are valued less than those held by men, which accounts for the wage gap. That's it. That's the analysis. It doesn't get much deeper than that, but let me read a few more quotes. Here's one that says, the gender wage gap is about 18,000 for university professors. Women academics earn substantially less than their male colleagues, and it goes on to decry this and say this is a horrible thing. Here's another one, bias suggested in women's pay gap. I'm sure that if you had scissors and a little time, you could come up with dozens of things like that just in the last month complaining about this. Here's one from the New York Times given to me by my colleague, Bill Okander. You'll remember this one, Bill? Why is her paycheck smaller? And it has this wonderful graph, and it shows that people women have lower wages in a whole myriad of jobs and occupations. Okay, according to the typical argument, continuing again, this is an inequity. It cries out to the heavens for redress. And what we've got to do is roughly what President Obama is now doing. He's got the EEOC who is suing, I think it's Walmart, but I presume he'll be suing everybody under the sun because women make less than men pretty much everywhere. And there'll be a lot of lawsuits. You people in law school will be doing well. And there'll be a lot of money being paid to women for past discrimination. Okay, that pretty much is one side of the case. What's the other side of the case? The other side of the case is a thing called marital asymmetry hypothesis. Namely, marriage has asymmetrical effects on male and female income. Marriage enhances male income and reduces female income. And that's the biggest cause of why men earn more than women. Namely, it's got nothing to do with capitalism, greed, male chauvinist piggery, or whatever. There is an asymmetry. Now, what I'm going to do is take a little survey, and I took this very same survey in Baltimore, so I'm going to do it again. And I'm going to give you 3 choices. It has to do with household cleaning and cooking and child rearing and getting up at 3 in the morning when the baby is sick and shopping and gardening and all that sort of stuff. Cooking and washing and everything done in the household. And I'll give you 3 choices. 1, the husband does more than the wife. The other, it's roughly equal. And the third, the wife does more than the husband. Now, I want you to, if you're married, answer this in terms of your own marriage. If you're not married, answer this in terms of the marriage with which you're most familiar, presumably your parents' marriage, or if you were brought up by some other couple, well, then their marriage. Okay. And now, if equal, it doesn't have to be 50-50 exactly. It could be, 45 to 55 either way. If it's close, we'll call that equal. Everyone with me? Okay. Raise your hands if the marriage that you're most familiar with, the husband does more of the housework and house cooking and cleaning and stuff like that than the wife. One liar. No, I'm kidding. I don't know you. I assume that you're telling the truth. Okay. But there's only one, and the group is about 100 people or so, give or take, I don't know. But it's a big group, and only one takes that view. The second choice is it's roughly equal, somewhere between 45 and 55. Raise your hand if the marriage that you're involved with is, okay, we've got maybe 15, 20 people? 25? It's hard to tell, and I'm not going to count. But I rely on you to give veracity to my count. It's somewhere around 20 people, 25 people. Now raise your hands if the wife does more than the husband, significantly more. Okay, now we got 80%, 75% of the group. Okay, now when I was in Baltimore, what I said, remember this is right after, what's his name, had won all those swimming medals, Michael Phelps. I try to introduce this concept of alternative or opportunity costs. And I said that whenever you do anything, it always comes at the cost of something, namely other things that you could have been doing that you would have done better or more had you not been doing the first thing. So I said that Michael Phelps is probably not a world-class cellist. Why? Because in order to be a world-class cellist, you've got to play the cello, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 hours a day. And if you're in the pool 6, 8, 10 hours a day, they don't allow cellos in the pool. You know, it gets the rosin, it's all messed up. You just can't do it, or you can't be as good a cellist as you would otherwise be had you not done the swimming. Now, maybe he's a decent cellist, but I guarantee he'd be a way better cellist if he didn't, swim around all the time. I gave the same example. I was on this is a little off the Baltimore thing, but later on I was on this black radio show, and I gave the same thing with LeBron James. I said, I'll bet you LeBron James is not a great flute player. And I was accused of being a racist for that. And I said, it's got nothing to do with racism. I'm just trying to illustrate alternative costs and opportunity costs. And LeBron is, dunking basketballs. He's not playing the clarinet or the flute or anything. So obviously he can't be as good a flute or clarinet player as he would be if he paid attention to that instead of dunking the basketball and jumping 50 feet in the air and, the way he does. It's just a basic element of economics. And if you don't like this sort of a thing, probably you shouldn't major in economics. But all this is really common sense. Let me give you another example. Bill Barnett and I can each run the mile in, well, when we were young, we could maybe do 5 minutes, but now, say 10 minutes. We can each run a mile in 10 minutes. And right before the race, what I do is I give him this briefcase, which weighs, 30 pounds. And now we start running. And before, we were equally able to run. And now, of course, I'm going to beat him because he's got this extra burden. Well, so is it with men and women. Men and women, in this century at least, are equally productive in the marketplace. Not so in the 19th century or the 18th century before, because then a lot of the jobs required upper body strength. And, to knock down a tree or to dig a hole to put in a building or things like that took brute strength. You were doing this with pick and shovel. But nowadays, the way you do it is with a button. So women and men now have equal productivity. Not so in previous centuries. Then men had more productivity in most jobs because a lot of jobs required physical skills, and like it or not, men are bigger and stronger than women are. It's just the fact. But nowadays, men and women are equally productive. They've got roughly the same abilities on average. But when they're married, they're taking on this extra responsibility. It's as if they're carrying an extra 50 pounds on them in the race. The story is the husband and the wife, they both have a PhD in chemistry and they both work in the lab. And now they come home at 6 o'clock, and what does the husband turn around and say to the wife? What's the dinner, dear? Now, they've both been working all day. They both have the same PhD. They both have the same accomplishments. But if she's making the dinner, well, then this is a little uneven. What is he doing while she's making the dinner? Maybe he's studying. Maybe he's having recreation. I'm not sure. And when she has kids, forget it. If she was taking 60 or 70% of the household before the kids, she's taking way more when there are kids. And apart from breastfeeding, which obviously only she can do, women are much more involved in kids, and I'll get into that a little bit later. It's got nothing to do with sexism or anything. It's just a fact of nature that if you give one group a burden, one group who are otherwise equal, you give them extra housekeeping, well, something's got to suffer, like Michael Phelps, like LeBron James. Men pay more in car insurance rates. Got nothing to do with sexism. It's just because men have a worse record in getting into crashes. That's the way the market works. Men pay more for life insurance because they have a lower life expectancy. This would be the opposite of the sexist thing. I'm trying to say it's not sexism, it's just the market. It's just cost and productivity and things like that. Okay. Has any of this changed? People say, well, Block, you're dated. Yes, it was true a while ago that there was an unfair division of household and child-rearing tasks between men and women, although I just took this 5 minutes ago, this survey. Here's what professional sociologists have to say. Quote, to their surprise, the sociologists discovered that the social and economic gains won by so many American women during the past decade have had remarkably little effect on the traditional gender roles assumed by the more than 3,600 married couples in their study. Although 60% of the wives had jobs, only about 30% of the husbands believed both spouses should work, and only 39% of wives thought so. No matter how large their paycheck, the working wives were still almost entirely responsible for the couple's housework. Husbands so hated housework, the researcher found, that wives who asked them to help out could sometimes sour the marriage. This isn't me speaking, this is sociologists. And, you know, a synonym for sociologists is socialists. I'm kidding. There are a few free enterprise sociologists, so I'm just kidding. Got to keep it alive here. Here's another one. Experts say that the toughest occupation may still be that of working mom. Many women who are bringing home the bacon are still expected to fry and serve it too. Notice how clever that is. There really are relatively few couples where childcare and domestic work are truly shared, says a psychologist at the Manager Clinic. Even unemployed husbands do no more than 36% of the housework. Now that's a study in high stress and high shame. Notice the value judgment here. I give no value judgment. I'm just saying this is the fact. Later I'll say why it has to be that way biologically. Here's another one. Home status for career women. The people in the front of the room can verify that this is correct. Home status for career women, same even if pay high, study says. Okay. More sociological insights. Here is promotion-seeking behavior in XYZ industry. The industry was, anonymously done. But it was reported in a book that I edited. And if you want any of these citations, please get hold of me later. What we're saying is that males have higher motivation to get a raise. Why? Because if you get a raise, then if the machinery breaks down at 3 in the morning, you got to get in there. And if you've got kids to take care of, you can't. So more men are trying to get these promotions. And especially with regard to married people, the difference is very big among married people. Here's some more evidence, if you will. Occupational primacy in this XYZ industry. Would you give up your job if a spouse's job required a move? 4% of the men said yes, and 53% of the women said yes. Spouse would give up job if respondent's job required a move. 92% of the men said yes, only 55% of the women. Respondent's job more important, spouse's job more important. You get the idea. And this is yet another reason why the male-female income ratio is the way it is, and it's got nothing to do with sexism or any of that capitalism stuff. It comes from the fact of unequal job sharing. It comes from the fact, let's talk about the pink-collar ghetto for a while. If you know that you're going to have 3 kids, and you're going to be out of the labor market from the day that the first kid is born, and you space them every 3 years, and you're going to be out of the labor market or only in it part-time until the last kid is 6 or 7 and can go to school full-time, 9 to 3, well, that's 10 or 15 years or 12 years, depending upon how you space the babies. Is it sensible to go into an industry where the human capital will atrophy, where there are discoveries every day, and if you're out for 12 years or only in part-time for 12 years, you're going to lose a lot? No, you don't go into computers, you don't go into physics, you don't go into chemistry where things change. Rather, you go into nursing or being a secretary or a nurse or things like that. And it just so happens that those professions or occupations pay less, but again, this is not due to the market. This is a rational development on the part of people who want to maximize their lifetime earnings. Okay, I've now given you the case. Is this better? I've now given you the case for thinking that there's nothing untoward going on. It's not evil capitalism. It's not discrimination. It's just due to choices, voluntary choices of men and women. And I'm now going to offer you 2 proofs or bits of evidence or something like that to buttress this. The first one is logic. I wish I could make this better. Maybe that's better. Now, I'm going to assume that the men and the woman each have a productivity of $10 an hour. And I'm going to assume, what the hell did I do? That should be a 7. This is all Bill Barnett's fault. I told him to do it. You can't get good help nowadays. That should be $7. Why 7? Because the male-female wage ratio is 70%, or the gap is 30%, or at least those are the numbers I'm using to illustrate this. So I'm assuming that you have an equally productive male and an equally productive female, and that the male's wage is $10 an hour and the woman's wage is $7 an hour. And I say to you that profit is the difference between productivity and wage, and that you earn 0 profit off the male, which is okay in equilibrium. In equilibrium, there are no profits. But you earn $3 an hour. See, I got the 7 correct down there, or Bill did. He just missed it up there. Now, I ask, is this sustainable? And the answer is nonsense. This is the feminist view. This is what people who say that there is a male-female gap and it's due to something untoward, that's what they're saying. They're saying that the male and the female are equally productive, which I'm willing to grant on average, men and women are equally productive. And they're saying that the male wage is 30% higher, or the gap is 30 cents or $3 an hour, which means, if it means anything, that you can earn a lot of profit off of a female. A female as if has a little sign on a lapel, hire me and make an extra $3 an hour. Right? Isn't that what that means? Isn't that the logic of the argument? That if you hire a woman under these strange circumstances, you make an extra $3 an hour. That's not sustainable. If you can make more money hiring a woman, and I'm a male chauvinist pig and I refuse to have anything to do with women, I don't want to hire them, they should be barefoot, pregnant in the kitchen, the whole business, I don't want to have anything to do with them, I'll go broke. I'll go broke because my competitors will say, I don't care, women, men, I'm just discriminating in favor of the color green as in money. And I'm going to hire the woman and underprice you and drive you out of business, you rascal. Now, I don't say that there's no such thing as sexism, or later on I'll get to racism, but I say that the market stops this. The market is the solution to the problem of sexism. If there is any in the first place, which there isn't. But if there were, the market would tend to drive it away. Will it always succeed fully? No. We're never at equilibrium. But there's always market forces grinding away at people who hire higher-priced workers when they could have got equally productive, lower-priced workers. It's just not sustainable. Now, some people are convinced by the logic. Other people, logic schmogic. Let's talk about a little empirical evidence here. What's going on here? What's going on here is if you want to test, and I don't like these words, they're based on neoclassical economics. I'm an Austrian, so I don't go for testing, I don't go for evidence. This is an illustration. But if you wanted to test this, what you would do, or if you want to illustrate this, better said, what you would do is, remember, my thesis, not original with me, but the thesis that I'm articulating is that it's due to marital asymmetry. It's the marital asymmetry hypothesis. So what you do is you take people who have never been married, and you look at the male-female ratio of people who have never been married, and you come up in Canada in 93. It's the same thing for the last 20 years, and I'll show you a diagram to prove that. And it's the same thing in Canada. I just happened to be in Canada when I did this. The ratio is 99.2. Now, I tell you, when you get 99.2, that's unity. I mean, when you deal with statistics, you never get exact perfection. The statistics are a little wonk. I mean, it's the government who's collecting them. How much can you trust government statistics? But even on their own bloody statistics, there's no wage gap. Whereas the wage gap for the ever married is gigantic. And the point is that there are more ever marrieds than never marrieds. And what I mean by never married is never married. Not married and then divorced or separated or widowed or anything like that. And it's very difficult to get these census people to talk about never married status. They only talk about singles. Sometimes you get it, but you have to like pull teeth to get it. My co-author and I were in a competition with Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell, about whom I'll have a lot more to say later, as to who could get a higher ratio for females to males. And I think we beat them. we got 109.8. Namely, females were higher than males by 9.8%. But you see, in statistics, what you're going to get is somewhere between 0.8 and 1.2. It'll vary. You never get pure 1.00 wage gap. You just don't get that. Anyone who's dealt with statistics knows that it's not a perfect thing like the logic that I just gave before. Looking at the other one there, you get a 93.4 for the never marrieds. And then what we did is we took age as a proxy for marital status. And we said, well, people between 16 and 24 probably have never been married, or at least very few of them have been married. And we look at the ratio, and we find 94.8, which again is virtually no gap. So if those of you who don't like the logic, maybe will like the statistics. See, this is a very telling thing, because according to the marital asymmetry hypothesis, this is very easily understandable. If you're married, the woman makes less because she's got more of a care, more of a weight on her back in the race. If you're unmarried, or between 16 and 24, which is a proxy for being unmarried, it's roughly equal. It ranges from 0.8 to 1.2, up and around that range. Namely, there's no gap. It's very incompatible with the other hypothesis. I mean, the other hypothesis said, all women, because of their biology or their plumbing, we're against them. But why would there be such a gigantic difference between ever and never marrieds? There wouldn't be on their theory. So their theory is got problems. Here's another one. Another implication of this is that there are certain industries where there's a disproportionate number of females in them. Think banking, insurance, law, things like that. And there are others, mining, farming, where it's mostly men. And according to that, according to the other theory, there should be bigger profits in the area where there are females. But if there are bigger profits in the area where there are females in those industries, well, then capital would tend to move out of the male areas and into the female areas because there'd be higher profits. So again, this is a very untenable, unsustainable hypothesis, and I think we have to reject that hypothesis. Here's another one where you standardize for children, and you can see when there are children in the picture, the ratio goes down because children are more of a burden on the mother. I don't say a burden in a bad sense. These are ideas that are voluntarily taken upon. I'm just saying that if you're looking at productivity in the market and they have children, well, other things equal, children will lower your productivity in the market because children are a pain in the neck. I mean, they take a lot of time. And here is that diagram where I was going to show you that nothing changes. The ratios are the same. This is 1941, 51, 61, 71, 81. I haven't done it recently, but the ratios are about the same. You can see that this one up here is the never marrieds, and this is the all, and this is the never marrieds, the ever marrieds. You get that? So it's a flat kind of a thing. Nothing changes. This is based on biology or sociology or something, and nothing changed in 50 years, and I don't think anything ever will change. There'll always be a female-male wage gap, and it's got nothing to do with capitalism. Okay, that's the end of my first subject, the male-female income gap. I'm now going to be a little bit more radical, and I'm going to talk about the glass ceiling. The glass ceiling is much more radical, and then I'm going to get into the racism stuff, which is even more radical than that. So hold on to your hats or your seats or whatever you're supposed to hold on to. Okay, what's going on here? What is a glass ceiling? Well, a glass ceiling is the idea that women can rise, but they sort of get stuck right there. And right there is not the president, it's sort of the vice president, right? They can get up there, but they can't really get up to the male level. There's a glass ceiling keeping them down. When Hillary was running for president, people were talking about the glass ceiling. Although in politics, there was Indira Gandhi, there was Golda Meir, there was Margaret Thatcher. There were a few, but if you look at how many prime ministers or presidents of countries there have been, you can name them on the fingers of one hand. And this is for the last, I don't know, throughout all history. And we've got 200 or 300 countries for many, many years, and you can only name 4 or 5. That's a glass ceiling. So even though a woman sometimes can get up there, we would count that as a glass ceiling. Okay? It doesn't have to be a perfect glass ceiling. by and large, women are prevented from getting to the very tippy top. Now, there are various theories as to why this should be. And the leftist theory, or the feminist theory, or the incorrect theory, is that it's due to the usual standbys, the usual thing, it's a male plot, it's patriarchism or whatever. I want to offer a very different theory. But in order to introduce this theory, I now have to talk about a thing called sociobiology, sometimes called evolutionary psychology by wimps who refuse to call it by its original name because it's politically incorrect, but it means the same thing. Okay, let's talk a little bit about sociobiology. What's going on here? Sociobiology is the theory that we are the way we are now because of what it took to survive 1 million years ago when we were in caves or in trees. That's the theory. If something kept us alive as in the trees or in the caves 1 million years ago, then the people who did that could leave progeny and they're our grandparents, and that's why we are the way we are. Let me give you an example. We are the species that doesn't like babies crying and loves babies smiling. I mean, a lot of advertisements pull at our heartstrings because, you see a baby smiling, oh, isn't that cute? You see a baby crying, you don't really like that. Now, we're not talking about a few sociopaths, but the average person just doesn't like babies crying and loves babies smiling. And isn't that cute? That bit. Well, suppose there were two species back then 1 million years ago in the trees or in the caves, and they were exactly alike. Ceteris paribus, other things equal, exactly alike. They had the same opposable thumb, they had the same brain capacity, they had the same speed, they had the same ability to hunt, to evade predators. Everything was the same, except that group didn't give a rat's rear end about babies, and we did. Now, which group is more likely to survive and prosper and continue the gene pool down into the present day? Obviously, this is a no-brainer. If you don't care about babies, if you don't care whether they cry or not, you're not going to take care of them and you're not going to survive. Does everyone see that? Let me give you another one. How many people here are afraid of snakes? What did Indiana Jones do in that movie where they were guarding the treasure? They had snakes all around, right? How many people here are afraid of bathtubs? Nobody. Milton Friedman, by the way, was killed by a bathtub. He was. He was 93 and he slipped in the bathtub and he hit his head on the side of the bathtub, and when they took him to the hospital, he passed away. Bathtubs kill many, 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 many more people nowadays than snakes. And yet we're all afraid of snakes and not bathtubs. Why? According to sociobiology, back then there were no bathtubs, so you weren't selected for fear of bathtubs. It had no survival value. But you were selected for fear of snakes. If you didn't fear snakes, you're not going to leave as many progeny around as people who did fear snakes. That's why we fear snakes. Because our grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents to the nth degree, snake fearing was a survival thing way back then, whereas bathtub fearing wasn't. So we're hardwired to fear snakes, not bathtubs. Now let's talk about Katrina. In the aftermath of Katrina, the prices of flashlight batteries, most of you were there, flashlight batteries, gasoline, water, milk, orange juice, rose through the roof. Rose through the roof. Why? Because, supply shifted to the left and demand, supply shifted to the left. There was very little of it. Prices rose. Governor Blanco said, this is price gouging and we're going to put the price gougers in jail, and everyone was applauding. Yay, yay, put them in jail. Why is this? You see, we as economics students all know that what the function of a higher price is like a call for help in the wilderness. When the price rises, there are two motives that people have to come and ship things toward New Orleans. One is benevolence, but you can only rely on benevolence so far. Benevolence is limited. The other one is self-interest, and Adam Smith had a lot to say about self-interest in The Invisible Hand. Well, a high price means high profits, and people now have not only a benevolent incentive, but a profit incentive to bring stuff from Tennessee and Alaska or wherever it is, Mexico, bring it here to make the profits. And as they bring it here, the price comes down. So what the price is sort of like a signaling device. But we're not hardwired to appreciate that. There was none of this market stuff a million years ago. A million years ago, the only way we could help each other was explicitly. You're sick this week, I'll help you. I'm sick next week, you help me. Right? People who didn't do that didn't get self-selected to live. So we do, we don't need good Samaritan laws. If we see someone drowning or by the road, we help them. The natural inclination is to help, as shown by the fact that there are still people coming down here to New Orleans to help us, volunteers to fix our houses and stuff. We all, except for a few sociopaths, and even the sociopaths, I don't much like Hitler and Stalin. They were bad guys. But the way I sort of come to grips with them is I say, well, maybe their genes were necessary to keep the human race alive a million years ago, because you need real vicious people to deal with the lions and the tigers then. I don't know if it helps you, but somehow it helps me reconcile the fact that we have mass murderers and rapists and other bad guys out there. Maybe it's sociobiological. They say to understand is to forgive. Well, maybe to understand is to not let it bother us so much that there are bad people out there. I don't know if that helps, and it's a little off the point. Let me get back to sociobiology. Another example. Take this feminist nonsense where they talk about, Amazons. The Amazon women, they were tough, they were ready to kick butt, and, Suppose there was another group, just like us, same opposable thumbs, same head space, same brain, same ability in every which way, only they were Amazons, and we were patriarchs. This is why we have patriarchy, not matriarchy. They were matriarchs. Well, what does a matriarch do? In the matriarch tribe, what the women do is they go out and hunt. And when the saber-toothed tiger comes a-calling at the cave, it's the women that come out and meet him, and the men stay in the back of the cave where it's safer. Now let me tell you a little bit about the birds and the bees. The farmer keeps 1 bull and 50 cows. He doesn't keep 50 bulls and 1 cow. Why? Because 1 bull can do the business. You don't need the other 49. The other 49 are good cannon fodder. But you don't really need them. Look, in World War II, Germany and Russia kicked the crap out of each other. At the end of that war, there were hardly any men between the ages, 15 and 60, who were around and capable of doing the business. And yet the next generation is as if they never disappeared. Imagine if the war was fought by women, and now there was no woman between the age of 15 and 40 alive. Would there be a next generation in Germany and Russia? No. Women or female cows are the limitation on biology, not men. Men are good cannon fodder. We're not needed that much. Women are the precious commodity, biologically speaking. So if you had this tribe that were matriarchs and Amazons and the women were fighting, well, do you think they're going to last? No. If the women, just like the Germany and the Russia case where the women fought, this other tribe would not exist. The reason we're patriarchal is because we're descended from a bunch of people who sent the cannon fodder men out to fight and do the hunting, which was more dangerous than the berry picking. Okay, I've now introduced sociobiology. I now want to introduce something else, and a lot of people are going to boo. It's called the normal curve, and remember at the beginning of my talk I said if you can't talk about these things, how can we solve any problems? So please bear with me, don't boo too harshly. I'm going to use a normal curve, and here are 2 normal curves. The top one is men. The bottom one... Wait, do I have that? The top one is men, and the bottom one is women. This is my freehand drawing of it. Here is a real one, an honest, a good, actual bell curve. But what it shows is that let me put it this way, because I think you can illustrate it more easily, that women are God's or nature's or biology's insurance policy. They're all clumped toward the middle, whereas men are God or nature or whoever you believe is responsible for this stuff, crapshoot. The women are all bunched toward the middle, the men are all over the lot. Now, let's look at this end A and B. If you were to go to mental institutions, who would you find in mental institutions? Virtually all men. Namely, at that many standard deviations below the mean, where mental institution types hang out, virtually all men. Oh yeah, there's a few Lizzie Bordens, there might be one or two crazy women, but most of them, pardon to Thomas Oz, my buddy, most people in mental institutions are men. If you look at homeless people, yes, there's a woman who's homeless, but it's virtually all men. If you look in prisons, you go to the prison. My colleague Dan D'Amico is an expert in the economics of prisons. He can attest that virtually all prisoners are men. Oh, there's a few women, but 95, 98% of all inmates are men. If you go to the graveyard, okay, well, there it'll even out. But if you go to the graveyard and look at people who died before their time, say 40 years or younger, all men. Virtually all men, I'm exaggerating. Well, look, if we're going to have a normal curve which is symmetrical, and you have a preponderance of men at A and women at B, well, then you have to have the same preponderance of men at C and women at D. Namely, out there on the right tail. The men also have to outnumber the women. If you look at Nobel Prize winners, except in wussy areas like poetry where they'll give it based on God knows what, the award. But if you look at math or economics or medicine or biology or chemistry or the Fields Medal in math, it's all men. Because when you get into 3 and 4 standard deviations above the mean, there are no women. Virtually. Virtually no women. In chess, grandmasters, it used to be, I follow chess, I play it a little bit. I'm a little bit better than a wood pusher. I have an 1800 rating, which is sort of pathetic, but at least I know the moves. It used to be that out of the 500 top chess grandmasters, there was one woman. Then came the Polgar sisters, P-O-L-G-A-R. These were phenomenal women. There were 3 Hungarian women. And the worst of them was ranked 300, and the next one was ranked 200, and the best one, Judith Polgar, was ranked like 35th, and this was amazing. Because before that, there was never any chess grandmaster. Now, chess doesn't take any upper body strength. But when you're talking 4 standard deviations above the mean, or 3 standard deviations above the mean, you're going to get a Polgar sister every once in a rare while. That's why we have a glass ceiling. Now, there are sociobiological reasons why it has to be this way and it can't be the other way. Suppose it were the other way. Suppose that it was the females that were God's crapshoot and the males were all toward the middle. Well then, the people at B are incapable of bearing children. They're too busy being the long historical equivalents of people being in the jails or in the mental institutions or that. Again, if there were 2 societies equally able in every other way, only one was ours and the other was this other society where the bell curves were inverted, we'd beat them out. That's why we're here, because we beat them out, if ever there were any. This is sociobiological theory. So, again, the fact that, oh, here's one more I forgot to give. I must do this. Here's this thing from USA Today, and it goes 40-0. 5 actresses face down the big 40. This is 3 or 4 years ago. We're talking about Meg Ryan, Susan Sarandon, Julia Roberts, Naomi Watts, Halle Berry, Catherine Zeta-Jones. And what it says is, Nicole, Naomi, Catherine, Halle, and Julia could force Hollywood to grow up. Now, what does this mean? What this means is that when a woman turns 40 or 45, she no longer gets the ingenue roles. She no longer gets the role of sex goddess or whatever. Now she gets the role of mother, right? Or big sister or something like that. Why is this? Is this Hollywood sexism? Let's go back to sociobiology. Suppose that there were two societies, one like ours, where you look at a 20-year-old girl and say, whoop-de-doo. Most guys do that. I hate to clue you in, but that's what they do. That's our society. But in this other society, they see a 65-year-old woman, they say, oh, wow, got to get that 65-year-old woman. Oh, here's a 20-year-old, oh, not ripe yet. Now, what prognostication do you people have for such a society? They're not going to have many babies, right? Because getting back to the birds and the bees, when you're over 40, you can't have kids anymore. And societies that revere the sexuality of women that are 50 and 60, look, they look pretty good to me. I'm 67. These women are 45. They look pretty good. But a society based on that will not survive. Our society beat them. Let me give you one more example. There was this case where two actors, very, very good-looking actors, but not famous, actors as good-looking as George Clooney, Tom Cruise, and Robert Pattinson. I don't know who these people are, but somebody said that they're the sex role models. On the one hand, and Britney Spears, Paris Hilton, and my favorite, Marilyn Monroe, which dates me a little bit. Two very good-looking actors, a male actor and a female actor. They were given the same script and let loose on a college campus, and the script was, they would each go up to a member of the opposite sex, and they'd say, hey, I've got this motel room over there. How'd you like to spend 2 hours with me doing what comes naturally? Guess what the results were? The woman got about 98% yeses. The man got 2 or 3. Why is this? Well, sociobiology. Women have only got eggs from age, 14 to 38 or so, times 12 is a couple of hundred eggs. Men have got a lot more sperm than that. Men are much more willing to give them out indiscriminately, to share them because they're cheaper, because you've got a lot more chances at life than women do. Just biology. This sociobiology explains a lot of male-female interactions. It's based on biology. It's not based on capitalism or anything like that. It applies in every culture. I mean, in the communist culture, I'm sure that the 50-year-old women were not the sex goddesses. Okay, I've now talked about the glass ceiling, and now I'm going to get into the third part. And what happened in Baltimore is I gave this speech. And during the question period, and Tom DeLorenzo was telling me to hurry up because we're almost finished, some kid asked me, okay, I see your point about male and female, but what about the white-black wage gap? Why is that? It couldn't be due to amarital asymmetry, and I said certainly it couldn't be, but it's due to different productivity. Before I get into that, I want to introduce something that I didn't use then, but I talked about, and now I'll use it. And what this has to do is with the way I teach most of my classes. The way I teach most of my classes, this is an environmental economics class, and what I do is I say, look, there are 5 viewpoints. There's the left moderate and the left radical, the right moderate and the right radical, and then there's the libertarian view. And what we're going to do is go down the list over air pollution, species extinction, recycling, global warming, garbage, overpopulation, forests, water, resources, energy, environmental racism, all sorts of issues. And any kid that has any other issue, I'll stick it on the list. And I wouldn't say what the whole course consists of is filling in the boxes, but what a lot of the course consists of is filling in the boxes. Namely, I want my students to know what the 5 views are on any given subject. Now, it's true, it only takes 1 minute. I'm not one of these teachers where the students find it hard to figure out where I'm coming from. In about the first 3 seconds, they can tell. They can tell a mile away. Look, I'm a professor. I have to profess something. Although, some professors are just this, what is it in bridge, no Trump hand, where no suit. Well, I'm not like that. I believe in these ideas strongly. But on an exam, the total exam questions will be, well, what's the view of the moderate right on forests? What's the view of the radical left on water? That's it. As long as they understand it, that's it. And then we can fight, because I like to argue about stuff. By the way, there are a lot of disciplines around here that have environmental courses. There's an environmental biology, environmental chemistry, environmental sociology, environmental literature, all sorts of courses. And they all cross-list each other. So I once went to this meeting and said, hey, how about cross-listing me? And they said, well, we insist on balance. And how do you balance it? And I gave them this stuff, and then they asked me, well, what books do you use? And I said, I use Al Gore as the moderate leftist. And they were apoplectic. How can you use Al Gore? Al Gore is not proper. You have to use a scholar. And they just went berserk. And I said, okay, well, give me bibliography. I'll look, and maybe I'll... And by the way, I sent them an email. How do you guys balance your courses? Guess what they said? They never replied. Evidently, they don't balance their courses, but they don't want to cross-list with me. Productivity. Because if blacks had the same productivity as whites and were paid less, then there'd be profit opportunities to hire black people, and that could never last for the same reason as females. And then they said, well, why do they have lower productivity? And I said, well, there are two theories. Today I'm going to give 5. Then I only had time for 2. I'm going to give you many more now, as soon as I finish this. And the 2 I gave were, well, here is the politically correct one, which I think has got some truth to it, and it's a vestige of slavery, and because of Jim Crow laws, and because of discrimination, and because of bad inner schools, and maybe bad diet, and things like that. And what's the other theory? Well, I said there's Charles Murray and Richard Herrnstein have this book called The Bell Curve, and their analysis is that blacks have a lower IQ than whites. And that's their explanation. And I gave these 2 theories, and I said, well, I'm an economist. I really can't tell which is right or wrong. Maybe both have some part of the truth, but I can't tell what proportion because it's a little outside of my area. Or as my friend and associate dean, David Lukauer, says, it's above his pay grade. And I sort of left it. And then I went off, and then later on I'll get into the brouhaha that erupted. But that's all I said. Now what I'm going to do is to go into other theories. Other theories as to why black productivity is lower than white productivity. So I gave you the first 2, slavery, Jim Crow, discrimination, diet, poor schools. The second one is IQ. The third one is from my friend and co-author, Walter Williams. And what he says is the reason that blacks have lower productivity is because of the government. The government has various policies that hurt everyone, but disproportionately hurt black people. For example, minimum wage, unions, welfare, public housing, things like that. Let me just talk about welfare a little bit. You know that story about the frog? You throw the frog into the boiling water, it jumps out. You throw the frog in the cold water, it stays there, and you heat it up slowly, and the frog stays there because its metabolism is not capable of discerning the difference, and it boils. Slavery was not strong enough to break up the black family. Slavery for the black family was like hot water. The black slaves jumped in, and they jumped right out, and they didn't much like it. The intactness of the black family and the white family in 1910 and 1920 was roughly the same as the white family. The same very, very low rate of illegitimacy, the same rate of divorce, give or take a percentage too. What happened in the some people call it a civil war, I call it a war of northern aggression. But what happened in the late 19th century was there were letters in the black newspapers, Joe looking for Louise, we were in this plantation, where are you? And the black family was very strong. Slavery didn't stop the black family. The black family was just about as intact as the white family. Slavery was like boiling water. Then what happened was welfare. This rotten person, what's his name? Lyndon Johnson, started this. I'm in polite society, so I'd say worse things about him. What he did is started welfare, and welfare is like cold water on the frog, and it screwed up the black family immensely. According to the Moynihan Report, in 1965, 23% of African American children are born out of wedlock. Today, the figure for the entire American population is 38%, and 70% for African Americans. Look, when you have an illegitimacy rate of 70%, you can almost say there is no family. It's a little exaggeration. There's some family, but the family has been busted up to smithereens by this crappy welfare system that is beloved of the left. vicious, evil, monstrous, ruining the black family. And yet the family is very important because we know from statistical evidence, this isn't praxeology for the Austrians in the room, we know from statistical evidence that when the family is not intact, there's all sorts of crime and drugs and prostitution and all sorts of bad things. The family is very important. Walter Williams sometimes says the KKK couldn't have done a better job of screwing up the black family than Lyndon Baines Johnson and all the progressive lefty social justice types. These are the people that have killed off the black family. Depraved, vicious, monstrous. That's why black people have lower productivity, because they don't come from intact families, or they come from disproportionately less intact families. This is one reason that Walter Williams tells us. Now, I gave out these letters, and I'll tell you more about these letters later. The criticism of me on the part of the Diversity Task Force. By the way, are there any members of the Diversity Task Force here now? What's your name, sir? Ah, well, thanks for coming. I appreciate you coming. And we'll reserve a spot at the beginning of the line if you have questions or criticisms. The reason I gave it out is because I was accused of racism, sexism. There is one letter in there. So what I did is I called upon my ex-students to write letters saying whether I'm a racist or sexist, especially students that have had me 3 or 4 times. And one of them was a little upset. A young black female student was upset because I mentioned that Walter Williams was a black person. Well, if that's what racism is, I'm guilty of it. He's a black person. In order to understand Walter Williams, you have to know that he's black. Because let me tell you a few Walter Williams' stories. One story is he wanted to get married. And immediately he ruled out half of the human race. Men. Because he was a dirty hetero. By the way, both heteros and homos, heterosexuals and homosexuals, are evil discriminators because each of them rules out half the human race. The only group that doesn't rule out anyone are bisexuals. So if we really don't want to have any discrimination, what we all should be is bisexuals. That's the logic of this craziness. So right away, Walter Williams just ruled out all men, pervert that he is. Then what he did is he wanted to marry a black girl. You know, de gustibus non disputing, wanted to marry a black girl. So he viciously discriminated against all white and Oriental girls. But then his depravity doesn't end here. Because he wanted to marry a pretty one who had a sense of humor, who was, that he could get along with. And each time he eliminated more and more people. Vicious discriminator. That's one Walter Williams story. Another one, he says, well, suppose you are sitting there on you open a door and there's a tiger on a couch. Do you immediately shut the door and run away, or do you go up to this tiger and say, well, I don't want to be a person who, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm pathetic. I can't think of anything. A person who doesn't discriminate against anyone? I'll think of it after this lecture is over. Do you go up to the tiger and say, are you a vicious tiger? In other words, you don't want to go by past experience? I don't know if I'm getting through on this point. I think everyone's sort of looking at me, what the hell is he talking about now? What he's trying to say is that we judge from experience. What's that word I'm thinking of? Not bigot. No. Generalize, that's close. It's not exactly what I'm looking for. Namely, we all generalize. It's called empirical evidence. You judge by the past. Even Jesse Jackson does that. He was once asked, if you were walking down this street and there were 3 black young men, and over here 3 Hasidic young men, which way would you feel safer? And he said, in the Hasidic direction. Okay, that's the Walter Williams story. Another part of the Walter Williams story is the minimum wage law. What's going on with the minimum wage law? What Walter Williams and all economists say is that the minimum wage law elevates black unemployment. Not just black unemployment, the unemployment rate of anyone with lower productivity, as indicated by by this one over here. Here we have adult males and teenage males. Adult males have more productivity than teenage males. So when you have a minimum wage law, what you do is you increase the unemployment rate of teenage males because they have lower productivity. I don't have time to go into the economics of the minimum wage law, but the point is that the minimum wage law is like a barrier over which you have to jump to get a job, and the higher it is, the harder it is to get a job. Adult men can jump over it, younger men can't. Well, on the left-hand side, there is such a thing as racial discrimination. When the minimum wage law comes in, then it pays to discriminate, or it doesn't let me rephrase it, it doesn't cost to indulge your discriminatory behavior. That's why black teenage unemployment is double white teenage unemployment, because there is racism in the society. So I'm not denying that there's racism. What I am saying is that the market ameliorates or eviscerates or gets rid of racism, because when you're a racist, you have to pay for your racism by losing out. Remember what racism means is that you'll hire the white even though you have an equally productive black employee, and you won't hire him because you're a racist. Well, if you do that, you're going to lose money, and you'll go broke. So what the capitalist system does is stop racism. I never said there's no racism. There's plenty of racism. Just look around you. There's racism. But the market rides to the rescue of the downtrodden people. That's something that you need a little economic sophistication to understand, and many people, white and black, don't understand that. Just as they didn't understand the function of the price gouging after Katrina. Okay, so that's my Walter Williams story. I now want to get into my Thomas Sowell story. But before I do, I want to call upon Clinton to show a little 5-minute interview with Thomas Sowell, who I believe he really should get a Nobel Prize in economics, and it's a shame and a disgrace that he hasn't. Please join me in looking at this.
For a TV, the world is thinking.
You're right, I'm going to quote you again. Among the many factors which influence male-female economic differences, the most elusive is employer discrimination.
Yes, that when you correct for all the various factors, such as the number of hours worked, the continuous employment versus taking a few years out to have children and so on, you take all that into account, the differences between men and women become quite trivial. If you look at the academic world, or as far back as 1969, women who had never married and who had earned higher incomes than men who had never married. They became a tenured professor at a higher rate than men who had never married. And then later on, if you look at the general population, if you take the women who are past the childbearing years and who work continuously, their incomes were higher than men who would work continuously, and so on. So the difference is that, not that the employer is paying them differently, but that they have different characteristics.
So the central variable in explaining economic differences between men and women is not employer discrimination, not the rise of feminism. It's that women, it's child rearing, marriage and child rearing. That's the variable. As that varies, a women's arrival or participation rate in high-level occupations varies with that. That's
Absolutely.
The okay. Now, in principle, you note, family responsibilities could be perfectly evenly divided between fathers and mothers. But that isn't the way it has worked in practice. Quote, I'm quoting you again, since economic consequences follow from practices rather than principles, the asymmetrical division of domestic responsibilities produces male-female differences in income, close quote. Question, what are the policy implications of that? If we become fixed on eliminating male-female income differences, is it the case that the only choice, the only route for doing that is to involve the government in redesigning the very nature of the family?
Well,
or am I leaping to a melodramatic conclusion?
No. Yeah, and logically that's certainly true. However, not all domestic responsibilities can be shared equally, such as having babies, which is not an inconsequential thing since the existence of the human race depends on it. But what it means is that women make choices that make a lot of sense for them. For example, the choice of occupations, that women tend not to go into occupations in which there's a very high rate of obsolescence. I mean, and if you're a computer engineer, and you take 5 years out to have a child and have the child up to the age where you can put him in daycare, well, my gosh, the world has changed.
Your job is gone.
You'd have to start way back. On the other hand, if you become a librarian, you become a teacher, other occupations like that, then you can take your 5 years off, come back, and pick up pretty much where you left off.
Thomas Sowell's newest book is a book called, what's it called? Here it is. It's called Black Rednecks and White Liberals. It's his book. Thomas Sowell is a very, very eminent economist. I'm a big fan of his. He's sort of a guru of mine. He's called an Oreo cookie because he, I don't know, acts white or something, which is part of the problem of the black culture, that if you act white by being, being studious, the other kids beat you up. This is what he's saying, that there are white rednecks, but there are also black rednecks. And when you have black rednecks who come from broken families due to the welfare system, it's no mystery that they should have lower productivity in the market, because this is equivalent to having a sack on your back. Very similar to this, well, not very similar, but akin to having the sack on the back as far as the market is concerned with regard to women. The fourth person that I want to talk about now, so I'm giving you other theories as to why blacks have lower productivity beside slavery and welfare, rent control, minimum wage, unions, things like that. The Walter Williams story, the Thomas Sowell story. Here's a story from John McWhorter, McWhorter, another black conservative or black free enterpriser. And what he says is that, quote, many blacks have adopted dysfunctional, crippling, toxic ideology that impedes their progress and success, notably victimology, separatism, and anti-intellectualism. Guess who peddles this poison in the black community? Guilty whites and grievance meisters like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. And I suspect, well, no, that's a different quote. What I'm trying to do is to explain why it is that blacks would have lower productivity than whites. And the main reason I can see is the black family has fallen apart. There are these other reasons that Walter Williams gives, the disparate impact of the welfare state and minimum wage and unions. The McWhorter sociological interpretation. Now what I'd like to do is talk about, given that we have this crisis of black Americans, what can economists say to solve it? Well, one way to solve it is to get rid of welfare. You get rid of welfare, and the young black woman or the young white woman, it's the same thing in Scandinavia. It's not a matter of color, it's a matter of economics. In Scandinavia, they're having the same problem with white women who marry the state instead of marrying the man who impregnates them. Because as Charles Murray in his book Losing Ground indicates, that the state makes a much better financial offer than the young black man who impregnates her. So if we got rid of welfare, we would help the black family. We would make the black family go back to what it was after slavery. And remember, slavery was incapable of ruining the black family. The black family's got great strength, but it keeps getting dissipated. Another one is legalize drugs. Right now, we read in the Times-Picayune every day, these 3 blacks shot those 3 blacks, young men. Every day. It's a horrendous thing. I was on this show, what's that show I was on with Our Story, with the black power people. And I was trying to give him this line. I was trying to say, well, look, and it's not a black thing. Look, when we had prohibition of alcohol, it wasn't black young men that were shooting each other, it was Italian young men that were shooting each other. In Mexico, there aren't black young men shooting each other, there are Mexican young men shooting each other over drugs. It's not a racial thing, it's not a color thing, it's an economic thing. When you prohibit something that people want, you drive up the price. When you drive up the price, you make the profits in it astronomical. And when there are when profits are astronomical in drugs, it's working for chump change to go and get a PhD in economics and earn $100,000 a year when you can earn $100,000 a week in drugs. So if we just legalize drugs, we would at one fell swoop save young male black lives who are being killed like flies in our streets. I was on this show with the Black Power people, and I couldn't get them to go for this. Oh no, this is wrong. And I tried to reductio on them. I said, well, you know, if you're so much against legalizing drugs because the drugs are harmful, how about alcohol? And I got the guy to admit, yes, we should go back to prohibition of alcohol. I mean, there's no reductios ad absurdum. If you go there, I mean, I thought for sure he would pull back from that. So I earnestly and honestly want to address the problem of black people, and I see that they do have a problem, unlike females who make less money. I don't see that as a problem. I think that is a voluntary choice. And as Thomas Sowell said, women who have never been married earn the same as men who have never been married. So I don't see that as a crisis. But I see the black situation as a crisis. And the best way to go is free enterprise. Now, I showed you some cartoons before, sort of left-wing cartoons. I want to show you a libertarian cartoon. I don't know if you can see this, but helping the poor. In the left one, it's the big government answer, and it says, the people down in the pit, and it says, give them more food. On the right, the free market answer is more rungs. And what's on the ladder? Freedom. So my analysis is that if you really want to help the black community, promote free enterprise, promote laissez-faire capitalism, promote private property rights and freedom and profit-seeking. Capitalism, free enterprise. It helps everyone. Adam Smith wrote this magnificent book, The Wealth of Nations, and he said that those nations are rich that follow property rights and economic freedom more, and those are poor that don't. Well, what's true for nations is also true for peoples. If you don't do it with people, look, the Soviets were smart. They're just as smart as us. They got people to the moon. Most of the chess grandmasters are Russian. And yet their economy was pathetic because they renounced capitalism. Capitalism is the way to go for the black community, the white community, whites, blacks, maroons. I don't know if there are any maroons, but if there are, capitalism is good for Martians, if we ever discover Martians. Okay, I'm now finished with the third part of my talk, and I'm now going to get into the fourth part. The fourth part is the brouhaha that erupted as a result of my speech in Baltimore. The first shot across the bows was Father Linnane, S.J., who wrote a letter saying that Bloch's speech was a disgrace. I'm just putting words in his mouth. If you're interested in these, just email me. I'm wblock@loino.edu. Just email me for any citations or support of what I've been saying. So what Linnane said is that many in attendance found of some of Professor Bloch's comments both insensitive and incorrect, and have shared their concerns. We favor open dialogue, but Bloch went too far. I'm putting words in his mouth, but that was the gist of it. The second one was the Loyola College Economics Department, and what they said was I was wrong because when you do an econometric study, and I think one of my colleague, John Levendis' students, Ann Longman, is she here? Ah, there she is doing an econometric study on this very subject. I paid her $5 to, no, I'm kidding. I didn't pay her $5 to come up with the right results. But what some people do in econometric results is what you do is you put more and more variables in to try to explain the gap. You put, I don't know, continuous service in the labor force, schooling, things like that. And then you can only explain so much of it, and there's always a gap. And what these economists who ought to have their PhDs taken away from them said, well, the remainder, the unexplained part, the E, is racism or discrimination. Well, that's just a silly mistake. So that was so much for the economics department, which is also apologizing for having me come there and speak. The third one is the diversity task force. Now this is, I mean, you know, the first two, it's Baltimore. What can you expect, Maryland? You know, they're a bunch of northerners. But here, it's right here in New Orleans, in Louisiana, at the Loyola University of New Orleans. And here, let me read the whole thing. It's not very long. In reference to the Times-Picayune article, A Tough Sell in the Marketplace by James Gill, namely, they're not basing it on what I said, but on what Gill said that I said. As Loyola's University Diversity Committee, we are dedicated to promoting an appreciation for the valuable contributions of all, instilling in every one of our students a desire to pursue excellence and to be women and men in solidarity with others. We also hold to the Jesuit ideal of rigorous intellectual examination in the pursuit of truth and therefore defend the right of academic freedom. However, namely everything that went before this, however you sort of... It is our responsibility to respond critically to statements made by members of the Loyola University that run counter to our commitment to inclusion and that marginalize women and African Americans, a majority of our community. Professor Walter Block's reductionist statements about the productivity of African Americans and women in the marketplace ignore critical factors and structural patterns of inequality. His flawed remarks are dangerous, fueling those with prejudices to conform their biased views. We must recognize the reality of racism and sexism in our society, whose impact has had long-lasting consequences in the lives of African Americans and women. The Diversity Committee encourages all members of the university to use this event as a catalyst to engage in meaningful dialogue that addresses these issues in a way that moves us closer to our Jesuit ideals. I find this very objectionable. Wing Fock, a colleague of mine in the business school, went so far as to say, the burden of proof rests on me to prove that I'm not a racist. Well, look, you people have now heard me for an hour and a half, rattling on. If you think I'm a racist, that's up to you, but at least it's based on what I said. Whereas the Diversity Committee was basing it on not what I said, no quotes from me, and I've got a paper trail a mile long. If they wanted to pin me as a racist, what they could have done is gone to my articles, and I have a whole book out on this stuff. I must have 25 articles on the stuff I've been talking about. They could have combed it and said, aha, smoking gun here, racist there, sexist, whatever. They didn't do any of that. They just said this, which was based on second or third hand information. Now, I think Wing Fock is terribly wrong. He turns justice on its head by saying I have to prove I'm innocent instead of they have to prove me guilty. Imagine if someone accused you of something and said, well, now you have to prove you're innocent. No, the burden of proof is always on someone who says you're guilty of something. You raped somebody. Prove you didn't. A little tough. But suppose that Wing Fock is right. Suppose that the burden of proof really did rest with me to prove that I'm not one. Why didn't the Diversity Committee have the decency to come to me and say, look, we think you're a racist. Come to us and prove you're not. In other words, if I have the burden, let me have a shot at overcoming it. No, they didn't do that. They just wrote this. They didn't have the decency to ask me, is what James Gill said about me true? I find this problematic, put it that way. The last, so what I did is I got these letters, and if you didn't get these, I've got more of them in that box, and there are some floating around. And I've got them on email, so if you don't want a hard copy, I can mail them to you. These are just letters from former students of mine who've had me many times saying that pretty much the charges against me are nonsense. One last thing that occurred was with this woman, Isabel Medina, who is a professor of law at our school, and she and I got into it, and she kept writing, Block, you have no right to say that what you say, that you speak for the whole community. And I said, huh? I never said that I speak for the whole community, that my views are shared by all the professors? And she said, yes, you did. So I said, well, where did I say it? And she would ignore it and reiterate her accusation. And finally, after 4 or 5 emails, by the way, I'm on sabbatical, so I have got a lot of time to do this nonsense. If I weren't on sabbatical, I don't know what I'd do, Well, I know what I would do. I would still get after the bad guys. But, finally what she did is she said something that another journalist said about me that could be construed if you pushed to say that, yes, I thought that I speak for the whole community. But I never said anything like that. I don't for a moment believe that. Last year I won the Dux Academicus Award for the best something or other here. Teacher, researcher, I forget what it was. And one of the things I'm sorry? I miss out on all the good jokes. And one of the things I said is I complimented all of my colleagues who awarded it to me because they know that my views are very different from theirs, and the fact that they would award me in this way shows something about them. So I know full well that I don't speak for the university, and Father Kevin Wilds wrote a very reasonable letter saying, you know, Block doesn't speak for the community, and Loyola is a place where we allow ideas to percolate and where we allow different viewpoints. And I think that was eminently reasonable. I have now concluded my formal remarks. Thank you. Okay, the microphones are here. Please come up to the microphones. As Bill said, we encourage we're having affirmative action for critics. So people who are critical of me, please line up first. And I don't see any mass exodus to the speakers. So anyone, questions, comments?
One clarification. You put the letters in, were there some that you got that you didn't include?
No, every one that I got I included. And I told you there was one that was critical by Barbie Free, not about her, but she was reporting on Rochelle Washington, this young black girl who was upset at me because I mentioned that Walter Williams was black in class, and that's the extent of my racism in those letters. Yes?
Hi. My question is, do you think it's women themselves who are at fault for the 30% wage gap because they value their own productivity less than they should?
No, I don't think it's women's fault any more than I think it's Kobe Bryant's fault for not being a world-class chess player. Or I don't know, Yo-Yo Ma is a lousy basketball player. Yo-Yo Ma is the famous cellist. It's just a function of alternative costs and opportunity costs foregone. Whenever you do something, you must necessarily handicap yourself in something else that you could have done better, but for the fact that you did this. Now, a lot of women get married and have children. I don't see anything wrong with that. Thank God they do it, otherwise we wouldn't have a human race. But in doing that, they take upon tasks that handicap them from doing other things. They are less good at other things because they're doing this. But that goes to anything. I mean, anything. Literally anything. Anytime you do anything, you incapacitate yourself in other areas compared to what you could have done in those areas had you not done the first thing. Do I think that women who do this are blameworthy? No, not at all. Let me just add one more thing before you continue. I have a daughter who's very, very smart. This is a dad bragging about his little girl. She was the valedictorian in high school. She was the smartest kid in grade school. She did beautifully. She got 1 B+ in college from an idiot teacher who didn't. And now she's getting a PhD in neuroscience. She's very bright. She tells me what she's doing. I don't understand the first word. Very, very bright. But as she gets up there, there'll be fewer and fewer females that she's going to be competing with. I don't know if she'll succeed. I always encouraged her. Now, in these letters, I list all the co-authorships I have with females. Many, many. Namely, I'm trying to promote the career of my female students, the careers of my female students, by co-authoring articles with them, getting them into law reviews, getting them into academic publication. So I'm trying to promote the career of all of my students, men, women, whites, blacks, it doesn't matter. But still, there's this glass ceiling.
My second question is the example that you gave at the beginning of your talk with the responses in the survey that both men and women gave to whether they would leave their job in place for a spouse or if a spouse's job was more important, whatnot. Would the responses in that survey be different if the wage gap didn't exist? For instance, if women did make on par what their male counterparts made, wouldn't women per se value their jobs just as much as men?
I surmise, although this this hasn't been done, and this would be a great research paper for someone to do, a good master's essay or a PhD thesis. I would expect, I have a hypothesis, that if they did that, only they broke it down by marital status, ever and never married, they would find that the never marrieds were identical to the men. Namely, they had the same views, although they couldn't have their spouse because they're never married. So that wouldn't work. But in terms of seeking promotion and seeking, not taking years off of the labor force, as Thomas Sowell said, if you look at women who've never been married, their market capabilities are equal to men who've never been married. So it's marriage that's the key. But I'm not against marriage. I'm married. My wife is a woman, There's nothing wrong with getting married. I'm in favor of marriage. Indeed, my analysis of the black plight is that not enough black people are married, that you have too much illegitimacy, broken homes, and, so I'm not against marriage. I don't want anyone to interpret me as saying, well, marriage is bad. Marriage is good, but you have to realize that when you do anything, including getting married, it's at the cost of something else. What's this other thing? Well, among them is not being able to earn as much money. Because you got kids. Many of you people don't have kids yet, but the people that have got kids in this room know kids take a lot of energy. And the wife bears the disproportionate brunt of that, and it shows in the fact that she can't earn as much money. Like take two chemists where the husband chemist says, "What's for dinner, dear?" That's assuming no kids. If she had kids, she wouldn't be at the lab.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've said some provocative things. Surely there are some people that want to say something? Yes.
I've got a positive comment.
Go ahead.
I think you described very eloquently the causes behind black and white wage discrepancies. Could we assume that the same discrepancies exist between maybe Asians and whites, and that the causes for the depressing of black wages would be the same causes for the depressing of white wages as compared to Asian wages?
Well, according to Murray and Herrnstein, the bell curve, there are differences between Orientals and whites and blacks and other groups in IQ. Now, I don't know how, to the extent to which this is true or a good explanation. As I say, it's a little outside of my area. But according to them, there are reasons why Orientals earn more than whites. The ranking is Orientals first, whites, blacks.
Could it also be attested to minimum wage or the welfare state in any way? Do you think? I mean, that's a submission, obviously. There's no evidence for that.
Well, these are very good questions. I confess I haven't really thought about them, but they would be very good research agendas for people to delve further into that. Okay. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that one. Come on, you guys. I'll give you a nickel if you come up and... Only a nickel, so...
In regards to you saying we should get rid of welfare and public housing, what would happen if we were to do that? Then that would leave a lot of people without proper means to get educations and live in a suitable home.
Well, go ahead.
But so if you would just take that away, right now you would have to come up with some other system to kind of wean it off of the welfare. Am I correct?
Yeah, I've got a great other system. It's called free enterprise. It worked very well. It works across nations, across peoples. If the black family were intact, they wouldn't need the welfare that ruined their black family in the first place. Now, public housing is a horrendous sort of a thing. The reason we got into public housing is we had rent control, which ruined the private market. See, a lot of times you get this modality where the government interferes and says, aha, the market isn't working. It's a market failure, but it was because of the government interference in the first place. And then they say, well, we have to fix that up. And we have to fix that up. And I have all these theories about, well, we can't build public housing high and we can't build it wide or whatever. Jane Jacobs is my guru on public housing, and what she says is that public housing has got two... Hey, Patrick, how's it going? Didn't notice you. An old student of mine. She said there are two problems. One is they have this inveterate hate of commerce. in public housing, you never see stores anywhere, like on the ground floor. In a lot of large cities, the high-rise has on the first floor stores. And what it says is that this takes eyes off the street, because when there's commerce, people are going in and out, you can look. And in public housing, there's nothing to look, so you don't get the yenta, Y-E-N-T-A, a Yiddish word. Old lady who looks down and calls the police if there's any problem. So Jane Jacobs says it's much less safe. But then the other thing is, public housing has a cutoff point. In other words, poor people can't go into public housing. Only poor people can go in public housing. So what happens is intact families don't get in there in the first place because their income is too high to get in there. So what you have is female-headed households with no adult males. There was this movie, Lord of the Flies, where society was the way a 12-year-old would like it to be. Well, public housing is the way a 16-year-old boy would like to have it, according to Jane Jacobs, if I can extrapolate from her. So what you need is adult male head of families in there, and they're automatically excluded. So public housing is a horror. It's socialist housing. Didn't we learn anything from the dissipation of the Soviet Union? I mean, this is just Sovietized housing. Social security is Sovietized security. You know, social medicine or healthcare is Sovietized healthcare. If we would get rid of it all and move toward a free enterprise system, black people and all people would be much better off. This is not an attack on black people. This is not an attempt to push black people down. This is an attempt to push black people up. But in order to see it, you have to see why black people are in the straits that they're in now. And the big reason is that their family is messed up, and the big reason for that is welfare. So don't think that, the poor black family right now, if they were the way they are, they really need welfare. They need support because they're in such dire circumstances. But they're in dire circumstances because of what the government did to them. So if we can get the government to stop doing this to them, then they wouldn't need the help. Look, we didn't have welfare before 1930. 1965 is when it really got going. We didn't have it much before that. It was very, very little. This is the Charles Murray Losing Ground book. Black people weren't dying in the streets. They had roughly intact families. They were doing, I won't say fine, but they were doing pretty well. You didn't have this crisis then. So don't look upon welfare as the savior of the poor. Look upon it as the oppressor of the poor.
Hi, Dr. Black. I was wondering if you could explain exactly how welfare has destroyed the black family.
Well, here my guru is Charles Murray in Losing Ground, and what he does is he calculates how much money welfare gives to the young pregnant girl. And he compares it with how much a minimum wage job could get for her. And he shows that the welfare is much more generous than the father of her child will give her. And then they have rules that, no man in the house rules. If there's a man in the house, you don't get welfare, all this welfare. So, previously, if a young girl got pregnant, it was a disgrace. You had to go to Aunt Sally somewhere else, and then you give up the baby and you come back. But when so many young girls get pregnant, the stigma is now gone. And
doesn't that kind of presuppose the broken family already? If they're supposed to be helping the single pregnant girl, then before she's on welfare, she's already creating a broken family.
Well, that's right. Well, you see, the point is that before 1965, when the black and the white families also were much more intact than they are now, it was a stigma, it was a disgrace to be pregnant without, they had this thing called shotgun marriages. You got pregnant, but then you got married before 9 months and it was sort of okay. And you had a movie star would get pregnant without a husband, but that was sort of an outlier. But now it's sort of accepted. It's the social norm, to put it in sociological language. And it's very harmful. But to answer your question more directly, the way welfare breaks up the black family is by offering pregnant girls much more money, stuffing money down their throats if they stay away from the man who impregnated them. Well, that pretty much says it all.
Thank you.
Okay. In reference to the male-female wage gap, you keep coming back to this idea of foregone opportunities. I was wondering, especially in your example of the two chemists that are married with no children, would this be an area in which the feminist analysis at least has some merit in that the expectation is that the wife will fix the dinner and do all this housework? So is the feminist analysis that there is some sort of cultural bias in this that's making some contribution? Is that a valid point?
Well, I don't take the feminist position as based on culture. I take the feminist position as blaming it on capitalism or free enterprise. My view is the culture. And now, to the extent that feminists share that, well, then we don't disagree on that. But I see that as part of the culture. I see it as a good part of the culture, that we have specialization and division of labor. I think that makes for more productivity. I don't see anything wrong with that. But my reading of the feminists, and I read quotes to you about, it's because women are deprecated in the market. No, it's not because women are deprecated in the market. They're not deprecated in the market. Never married women make as much as never married men. So how can you say it's due to deprecation in the market? It's due to this marital asymmetry hypothesis, which underlies all sorts of other things that, women take time out of the labor force, or they work part-time, or things like that, or they don't enter the areas, they enter the pink-collar ghetto areas instead of physics or something, which pays more.
Okay.
I'll go either one, but we'll definitely get you.
All right. I guess my question is, say a black individual isn't in the cycle of welfare and all that kind of thing. How do you explain the wage disparity on two individuals, same or comparable degrees, given a specific position and in that area?
I'm not sure I fully understand. Could you elaborate a little bit? That's okay.
Well, no. I guess there are studies, going past the whole plight of the black man or what have you. Once you get into corporate America, there is a wage disparity between two individuals given the same credentials and things like that. And I don't know where the productivity portion comes in that. Or
well, assuming that the credentials are good proxy variables for productivity, and now here you have you and the guy behind you, white guy and a black guy, with I'm just using you as an example, a guy with an orange top, guy with a tan top. They each have the same credentials. They each have the same productivity. Only the white guy is making $100,000 and the black guy is making $80,000. Well, if that were true, it would be a wonderful opportunity for me to hire you and pay you $81,000 and make more profit than the guy who's hiring him. Do you see that?
Yeah, but are you saying that doesn't happen? I mean, I understand what you're saying. In theory, that does work. But
I'm saying that happens. Sure. That's the logic of it. The economic logic of it is if you both guys are worth $100,000 and for some reason you're paid $80 and he's paid $100, well, it's as if you have a little thing on your lapel that says, hire me and you make $20,000 profit. Anyone who insists on hiring him instead of you is going to lose out in the competitive struggle. Now look, there are other complications. There are three kinds of discrimination. There's employer discrimination, there's customer discrimination, and then there's employee discrimination. I've only been talking about employer discrimination. I mean, it's a complicated subject in labor economics. I think we teach a course in labor economics, and we would go into this stuff. I've only been discussing employer discrimination. Employee discrimination, like if whites hate blacks and are always fighting, well, then you just have separate work crews. You guys work here, you guys work here. So that wouldn't imply a different wage. The third one is customer discrimination. If people say, well, blacks, if a black touches my food, it's poisoned or something like that, well, then they lose out. But the point is that the market grinds and grinds and grinds. So if there is a wage differential, I'm not going to use as my first explanation discrimination. I'm going to use different productivity. And I have lots of reasons why the productivity is different, mainly in the case of blacks because of the family formation. And all these things, that I've been talking about with McWhorter, with Thomas Sowell, with Walter Williams.
Well, we disagree on a lot of things. You have a lot of facts, and there are important things that are a part of truth. But there's only one part of truth. And when you make a statement, you say, this is the truth, and these things don't exist. You jam me up for not quoting you accurately all the time, but basically, this is the way it is, and this way there is no discrimination against women. There is no sexism. There is no factors that enter into it. So you make it either or, and I think there's a both and in many things. And certainly the complexity of all these issues, there's a both and. That's number one. Number two, you have talked about the market solving all these problems. Well, we had a Great Depression where people starved to death because there were no other kinds of things. The market creates booms and busts, and people die. And there are those who say, let them starve, and then the unemployment will change. And we don't need to do anything about it. That's a piece of the reality. We talk about the family. I came to New Orleans in 1970, 25 years old. The day I got here, I got a job. It was a minimum wage job. But a minimum wage, I only had a $55 a month house and $20 a month water bill or light bill and $4 a month. So that allowed me to buy a house, not buy a house, but rent a place, get married, wasn't living large. One day a week, if I got a job on the river, I made as much in a day as I made in a week at the other job. The point is that people don't choose not to get married and support children. There was opportunities because you could go on the river, you could do all this. There's no jobs on the river anymore. There's no steel factory down in Chalmette anymore. There's no Cutie Togs clothing factories anymore. And the minimum wage does not allow you to buy anything anymore. And we're talking about eliminating it. Nobody can live on that, period. So, you know, there's another piece of reality about economics. And then the other thing about it is flat-out discrimination did pay. Because black people from the Plessy versus Ferguson decision down to the present weren't allowed to have a job above a janitor's job. Their schools were not allowed to it was even against the law to learn how to read. In Louisiana, right up there in Opelousas, they had no high schools when my wife was going to school for black kids. After the 8th grade, there was no schools for them, except one Catholic school. So if you're black and you got a high school education from Opelousas, that's the reason. So obviously, all of these things are impacting what we're looking at, not one thing. And I think that, and the other thing is when one cites intelligence, IQ scores, and says there's superior races and inferior races, that bogus kind of stuff has been used to hold down people, discriminate against people, has been very damaging, and has allowed people to justify their behaviors based on that, and has nothing to do with the individual facing them, who is smart or dumb. Men and women in the workforce, when I worked in the factory, there were men and women, some were smart, some were dumb, some were married, some had kids. We all had the same productivity driving the forklifts or loading those trains. And when the technology changed, our productivity went up, but our brains did not change. I think that, you know, there's too much about intelligence and jobs, and that's who makes the money. We had George Bush for president. That's proof that an idiot can become president and has nothing to do with their intelligence. So that's all I can say.
Okay, thanks for your comments. I took notes because I feared that I wouldn't do justice to your comments without notes, and I've got 7 different points. I'll take them in the order that you made them, and before I answer, I just wanted to congratulate you for coming here. I notice you're the only one of the committee that did, so I'm very grateful to you for coming here. I don't say that all the other members chickened out. There were other events going on tonight, so I'm not assuming that, but there's this woman, Artemis Preshul, who is going to, a colleague of yours on the committee, who's going to set up a dialogue, and I'm going to join that. So perhaps out of this problem can come some good dialogue. So I thank you for coming and for mentioning those points. Okay, here are the 7 points that Mr. Quant mentions. First of all, he says in effect that I'm putting in my own words, I don't know what the right way to say this. I'm being very, professorial isn't right. I'm being too pushy with my views, if I can put words in his mouth. I'm saying I'm right, everyone else is wrong. Well, yeah, I suppose that's true. I am guilty. But that's the way the professorial life goes. I mean, out of dialogue, we get 1/2 inch closer to the truth. But I'm not just saying I'm right and everyone else shut up. I'm saying, here are my views. Here are my reasons. Here's the logic. Here's the empirical evidence. Here's the views of the other side. Here's what I see wrong with the other side. I never cram anything down anyone's throat. I'm professing in my own classes. I never ask a question, do you agree with me on this? And if you do, I give you a good mark, and if you don't, I don't. If you look at these term papers that turn into refereed journal articles, I'm very proud of all of them, but I'm most proud of the ones where I get students who are 180 degrees opposite me, really bitter market critics, and I help them get published anyway, and I give them A's. Jordan Schneider, I don't know if any of you know her, she's got 2 publications on that list. I list all my, well, I don't list hers. I don't list her because she's got single author publications. See, I can't co-author something with a student that I disagree with. Just can't do that. But she has 2 publications in referee journals that started out as term papers in my class, and she's 180 degrees opposite me. And the same with this young black girl, let me see, Tunisia Arsenault, also took a point of view the exact opposite of me. I favor reparations for black slavery, and she didn't like my views. But I'm very proud of the fact that I support the careers of people that disagree with me. So I'm not being, the word I was looking for was imperious. I'm not imperious. I'm not saying, look, I'm right, and if you don't agree with me, I'm failing you. I think that would be despicable. And I've been the victim of stuff like that too, when I was a student. I didn't much like it, and I certainly wouldn't do it. So I reject the charge of being imperious, but I accept the charge of being a professor and professing something. I mean, some people are very even-handed. You can never tell what their views are. I'm not like that. Different people have different styles. The second one is the depression. Mr. Kwan said we have a depression and people were starving. Well, I don't know if they were starving, but they were doing very, very badly. Bill Barnett and I are coming out with a book. The title is Essays in Macroeconomics, a Free Market Perspective, something like that. And we go over in 300 pages why it is that the government created the depression. And I'm not going to spend the 10 hours that would be necessary now to tell you about that. If anyone wants, email me and I'll send you more stuff than you really want to read. The third one is the minimum wage. Yes, the minimum wage isn't very high. It's $7 an hour. I think with Obama it'll be up to 10 before we know it, because we have to have a living wage. But this is a complete misconception. The minimum wage doesn't help anyone. The minimum wage hurts people, and it hurts disproportionately black people, as shown by the slide that I showed you, where black teenage unemployment is twice as much as white teenage unemployment, and 4 times as much as adult white teenage unemployment. This is a disgrace that black people are so discriminated against, and there is racial discrimination. It only comes out when the government short-circuits the market. When the market is short-circuited through the minimum wage, there was this guy who asked the question, the guy in the orange top out there. Remember I was saying if you're making $80,000, I have an incentive to hire you, but not if there's a minimum wage, and then all bets are off. So the minimum wage, if you would study this carefully, you would see that it is the exact opposite of helping the downtrodden. It hurts the downtrodden. What it really is a plot on the part of unions to raise wages of their competing unskilled workers to unemploy them. You see, when a union asks for a wage increase, the first thing the employer thinks of is, well, one factor of production is now more expensive. How can I substitute away from these guys? And one way to substitute away from them is with low-wage workers. You fire one union worker, you hire 3 unskilled workers, and you get the job done. The last thing the union wants is for you to hire three unskilled workers who are disproportionately black. Now, in the old days, what they would do is they'd call them scabs and they'd try to beat them up. But now they're more white-collarish, and they get a law passed, and the law makes it impossible or uneconomic to hire them. That's the minimum wage law. So I think you and I have great disagreements on the efficacy of the minimum wage law. The third thing he talks about is Plessy Ferguson and the law. And I agree. I agree here. Let me give you my favorite case. There was this woman, Rosa Parks, who refused to sit in the back of the bus. And there was a big case about her. Plessy Ferguson and Rosa Parks are important law cases in our jurisprudence. And I asked myself, well, why didn't some other bus company come in, owned by a white or a black or a Martian, it doesn't matter, and set up another bus line and said, look, blacks, you can ride in the front, you can ride in the back, I don't care where you ride. Why didn't someone else do this? See, if black people were unhappy because they were forced to sit in the back of the bus, this is a profit opportunity for someone else, for an entrepreneur to come in and say, I'll set up a bus company and I'll let blacks ride wherever they want. Why didn't someone else do that? Well, the answer was, of course, in order to do that, you had to get the permission of the white, racist city council of whatever city it was, and they're not about to give any franchise permission to anyone else. So in other words, the market was not free to solve the problem. And then people who don't appreciate the beauty of the market say, you see, there's a problem, the market didn't solve it. They don't realize that the government caused it in the first place, just like the Depression was caused by the Federal Reserve System and by fractional reserve banking. This whole problem of blacks in the back of the bus was created because you didn't have free entry, you didn't have competition. And the reason you didn't have it had nothing to do with free enterprise, it had to do with the abnegation of free enterprise. The fifth point is IQ. Yes, IQ is misused. IQ is used by Hitler to do heinous things. Does that mean we should not use IQ anymore? Look, Hitler did a lot of things. Hitler liked, what are those hot dog dogs? Dachshunds. He had dachshunds. He liked dachshunds. Should we not have dachshunds? Hitler was a health food guy. Hitler was against smoking. Should we not be for health food? Look, yes, IQ has been misused, and it's been misused in heinous ways. But that doesn't mean that we can't use the concept. We can use the concept if we want to explain and understand reality in order to solve problems. I get back to what I said at the very beginning. If firemen can't use the word hose or water pressure, if doctors can't use the word MRI or stethoscope, you're not going to have good firemen and good doctors. Well, if economists can't use the word IQ because someone misused it, well, then we're less capable of solving problems and getting to the truth, which is what we want to do. The sixth point is I took notes, but capital. Mr. Kwan quite properly says that when you have more capital, this leads to higher wages, and that's absolutely true. One of the reasons that we are very productive here is because we cooperate with a lot of capital. In many countries, they're still in picks and shovels. Here we're doing steam shovels. This is quite right. By marginal revenue productivity,